Today, we are super excited because we're kicking off something different. Given the time that we're in and the social, economic, political landscape and how all of that is impacting people, we felt that we should focus on wellness, mental health, and social connection, not just in our personal lives, but also in our professional lives. I'm Allison Allen, and I am joined by my co-host, Dean Martin, and we have a special guest. I want to introduce Bhavik Shah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bhavik Shah. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a founder and culture change strategist at the intersection of workforce, mental health, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've been doing this work for 17 years in the leadership space within financial services. Not your typical background for this work, but if anyone is in finance or has gone through financial services, you know exactly what it takes to thrive. And now I'm positioning my career to help leaders navigate burnout, retention, attrition, etc.
I think one of the things that is really important to Dean and I is living into the trueness of who we are as human beings first. Well-being is part of our mission, which is why this topic is super important. I'm just going to turn it over to Dean to get us started.
Welcome in this series around mental health in the workplace. We really want to talk about something in particular, which is about the stigma of mental health, and ask our leaders, what if we prioritize mental health to the extent that it actually became your organization's competitive edge, and not just the stigma or something that we're avoiding or something that we just begrudgingly accept that burnout is just part of the deal, but rather, no, let's rewire it. What are some of the signs that you think a leader should be looking out for?
For everyone listening, it's beneficial to define mental health. Similar to how physical health is on a spectrum where we experience joy, happiness, fulfillment, grief, stress, and anxiety. It's how we connect with the world and our communities, how we deal with things in our lives, and our emotional, our psychological behaviors all impacted for our mental health. To be clear, mental health is not mental illness. When we talk about mental health, it doesn't mean that we're speaking about someone's diagnoses, such as depression or anxiety or schizophrenia, etc. It is how we are taking care of ourselves from a mental perspective, just how we take care of ourselves from a physical perspective. For leaders, especially as they're navigating these waters, that no two employees are the same. Some employees may be really good about masking some of the mental health challenges that they're facing, and others it becomes very visible. There needs to be a foundation of trust in organizations. Employees must understand that there is a culture of psychological safety. What that means is that there's a freedom of expressing views, thoughts, and opinions without any reprimanding or a backlash. If it's present, people will feel free to address their concerns and, most importantly, advocate for what they need at the workplace. They feel they have the confidence and trust and assurance that they can raise their hand and say, hey, I need help with X. And then understanding that things may change as people progress and evolve. Some may be really good at masking some of the challenges. Others may be very visible. If they're stressed, you can see it, you can feel it, how you engage with them, how they show up in different spaces. Your job as a leader is to have the same support throughout, whether that's a listening ear or whether that's providing other forms of flexibility. Your job is to become a therapist or a clinician or a psychologist. You shouldn't give medical and mental advice on that level.
In the spirit of being provocative, most people might hear Dean's question and go, are you kidding me? So now my job is to walk around and look for signs of people who have mental health issues. I got 15,000 things to do. Seriously, that's what I have to spend my time doing. What's your reaction to that?
I think I may have an equally provocative answer.
Okay, go for it.
It ultimately comes down to your legacy as a leader. What kind of culture do you want to build? Because if it is a culture built on micromanagement, just meeting goals and client deadlines, this is how we get things done, regardless of people's differences, then don't do this work. It will show if that is your ultimate goal, to create a culture of that nature, then it's coming down to how you show up as a leader, showcase vulnerability and create psychological safety. If you want to get to an end goal, but you're not taking the right steps, then you're not going to meet your goal. It comes down to that question: what is the legacy that you want to leave?
I love that legacy question. If the frame of a leader is to get the best out of people so they can do amazing work, then you are caring about creating that safe space for them. You and I were catching up about a month ago, and you just said, I really thought we would be further along post COVID with mental health. And I'm with you. Why don't you think we're further ahead in this area?
For many people, we all believe that this was going to be a transformative moment in our history, in our workforce. For a little bit, it felt like it was actually going that way. And now it just feels like a full boomerang. We're back to pre-pandemic. One of the reasons why I firmly believe that people are not willing to make this into this transformative juncture in their workforces is that it's hard to do this work. It's hard to change your behaviors. We're talking about leaders like ourselves, but we're also talking about leaders who have maybe 30, 40 years ahead of us. When you think about it from a psychological perspective, it's hard to change habits if you've been doing something a certain way for so long. Now that important crossroad has come up, right? Do we continue to invest into our people and create the sustainable culture? Yes, we've created resources, we've provided training, we've made great marketing slogans on why mental health is important. But to get to that point of legacy, you have to change. The human behavior element is something that I think a lot of leaders are struggling with, to integrate this in a capitalistic structure, because people don't see this as a hand-in-hand strategy. They see all of these workforce benefits of DEI, anything else in terms of culture, as a nice to have.
I read a report, it's probably about 2 years old, Kaiser Permanente, which is a healthcare provider, found that 62% of missed work days in the US could be attributed to mental health conditions. We care about the impact leaders have on their people. But if that's maybe not your burning platform or your deepest heart's desire, or it's like number 9 on your list of motivators, at least look at it from this point of view of that attending to our employees' well-being and their mental health is going to benefit the bottom line.
In my work, especially recently post-pandemic, a lot of leaders trying to figure out where to go next. They want the business case, then they will pursue this work. And there are a lot of companies who have done great research. For example, the World Health Organization, something around $12 billion have been wasted from mental health challenges, and $1 trillion lost in productivity, which is mind-boggling. And if folks decided to invest into mental health, leverages data, this is a great business case. There's some leaders who think that's all great and dandy, and they'll have their slogans and their mental health awareness events, but then they're not integrating the work because either they don't care, which is the sad fact, some don't. We have to accept that. Most do, but they don't know how to integrate it because of their roles. A lot of leaders right now are burnt out from meeting targets, client deadlines, or bringing in sales. So wherever you are in the workforce, there is that pressure to thrive and continue to be responsible commercially. The more senior you get, you have some sort of pathway back to the bottom line. They're not able to integrate mentally healthy cultures with that bottom line. It's a lack of education, but also a lack of capacity at the same time.
When I was listening to the stat that Dean gave, and then when I heard what you say, I think part of the issue is, for a lot of leaders, that sounds like the World Health Organization's thing, right? Part of the challenge is no one is tracking this. We're always looking at attrits, internal mobility stats, retention. Some people analytics functions will say this many people have been out and therefore X, Y, Z, but it often ends up being benefits organizations' problems to track that kind of thing. Do you think there's an opportunity for the people team to start telling a much better story?
It's a great question. There's a couple of things that are coming to mind. One, do they have the mechanisms to track this data? Are you asking your people about their experiences at work, the culture? So engagement surveys have become very popular over the last decade. I know they've been doing them way before that too, but especially now as we're looking to use that data and leverage it for the budget for these type of programs, there are often questions about how are you finding the culture? How is your relationship with your manager? What is your perspective about mental health at the workplace? But are they asking these questions fundamentally? If you are asking these questions, what are you doing with this data? I've had clients just sit on it, which is such a huge waste of everyone's time and money. What a lot of leaders don't realize is for marginalized groups who have been conditioned to operate in a certain way, who have gone through similar experiences about assimilation and conforming, that it takes a lot of courage for us to even fill out an anonymous survey because we are fearful that somehow it's going to come back to us. Maybe there is a smaller team and I'm the only person in finance. If I fill out the survey, they will know I said X, Y, and Z. I've been in boardrooms with high-paid executives and they said, oh, I know who that is. Just by the wording, language, and terminology. And I shake my head and I just am in awe that they're able to identify someone, but also say it out loud. The audacity to say it is wild to me. So they sit on this data and they don't do anything. So the person, for example, if I'm in a position, overcome a lot of stigma, fill out the survey, and then they do nothing with it, then I have lost trust in my leadership team. Let's say they're doing all of this. You have the survey, asking the right questions. Ultimately, think about your resources. They can't be one size fits all. They have to be adaptive and you have to remain agile. If you did something 2 years ago and it seemed to be working, the world's changed 10 times over. Just look at where we are today. There's so many events happening in the world, and some are heartbreaking to see, others are equally frustrating and anger-inducing. People are impacted by this on a day-to-day basis, so you cannot stay stagnant.
I'd like to think about the source of somebody's mental health challenges or their peaks and troughs. I don't see everybody as just a static of, that one's got a mental health condition and that one does not. We have good days and bad days and good quarters, etc. There may be things people say, and you mentioned it at the start, my workload, the expectation around my sales, my clients' relationships, or is there transparency from my senior leaders around where our organization is going? That has an impact on me too. And then there's the third piece, which is just personal. Just because you're a living person, in a family, single, dating's not going well, worried about money, your baby's sick, your husband's a nightmare, or just being alive and commuting. All of these things, in some ways, that's a false way of compartmentalizing it. But somebody shows up at work and they are experiencing something that just is not subjectively nice. I'd love to look at these areas from a personal point of view or an organizational point of view. What can a leader do practically to encourage this culture of openness?
Right. This is exactly what I talk about with my clients. It goes back to what I was saying at the start, the foundation of trust. It needs to start with you and being an active role model. That comes in different forms. It can, one, take a form of being vulnerable about your own mental health. You could say, last week was hard, but I did X, Y, and Z, manage it. For example, when I was in financial services, I talked about my mental health because I needed to, one, showcase to my own team that speaking about mental health does not make you incompetent or weak to do your job. It's simply the human experience. There will be bad days. You have an argument with your partner or a family member and you'll shift your moods and it impacts you on a day-to-day basis. Or maybe you made a mistake at work and you're beating yourself up saying, wow, I can't believe I did that. It's just making work human again. But we lost or maybe never had it. I'm still debating if the workplace was ever humane.
I think I'm slightly older than you. And I do remember a time when I felt truly loved by my organization. I hear what you're saying. I do.
But that's about perspective, right? If my experience has been
Yeah.
You're just an operation cost to the business.
Yeah.
That stays with you, especially in
Yeah.
corporate or any corporate world.
100%.
So it goes back to that role model. If you're talking about your own mental health, showcasing vulnerability, being transparent about your workload, setting those healthy boundaries are all important and ways to showcase to your team that I'm doing this for my own mental health. I want you to be secure enough and psychologically safe enough to do the same, whether it's personal or whether it is a work related thing, that you feel empowered to raise your hand or you come to me one to one and ask what you need to be successful. What I don't want leaders to feel is that they have to diagnose and solutionize. In this world, we always are thinking about problem solving. You cannot solve people's mental health challenges. That is not your job, firstly. And secondly, you're not qualified. But what you can do is, for example, if it's work related, make sure you have healthy boundaries on your work hours. If it's a holiday weekend, don't call your team about something that's non-urgent. Make sure you're socializing to your clients that these are the values and norms that we practice. When it comes to personal things, sometimes you don't want to get involved, and I understand that. But if you see behavior change, for example, me, if you see me every day and I'm very chipper and I go get my coffee at a certain time and you know my traits, but then for 2 weeks I'm very silent, I encourage you to ask, hey, how are you? Is there anything I can do to support you? I've recognized you're quieter than most days. Can I help in certain ways? Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes no, and that's fine. But just consistently do that, because that's what showcases role modeling and vulnerability. And eventually, if the employee feels safe enough or they feel like they need extra support, they'll ask for it.
One of the things that you were talking about is the leader's action with their team.
Sure.
What are the leader's resources, especially since DEI, well-being, investment are being cut? We talked about tell the story and use the data and all of these things to convince leaders to do the right thing. But what are the resources to that leader who are now asking to be a little bit more vulnerable, right? Share their context to set boundaries for themselves and their team. What are some resources that also can help the leader invest, but also at the same time, how can the leader advocate for more resources? I'm stacking my questions, but you get where I'm going.
Oftentimes, leaders are the first to not take care of themselves or manage their mental health. So it's all bottled up and then they're not able to show up for other people. I would like to think if a leader is in that role, that they have the agency and influence to say, I need this. It comes down to why they're not asking for it. Budgets may be cut, right? For example, a lot of companies are doing that. However, if you are a leader in a particular area and you have your peers or if you're connected to the CFO, the CEO, CTO, whatever the case may be, I would like to think that your role and position automatically give you an edge over your average intern, analyst, associate. But the question is why they're not asking. It may be individual stigma, depending on who you are, where you are, how you identify. Internalized stigma of seeking support is just not in your vocabulary. Secondly, even if you ask, the culture of the organization is less focused on the well-being of folks. It's more focused on the bottom line. So there might be two reasons, right? It might be internalized, or they just may feel that it's not going to go anywhere. But let's think positively, that they can raise their hand and ask for support. The culture is there as long as someone advocates for what they need. It's important to bring people like me in. I'm not just amplifying myself. There are a lot of other organizations, a lot of other great experts and strategists. Rather than trying to figure everything out yourselves in the business and your team, it's not plausible. You're taking too much on and expecting the world to change overnight. When it doesn't, you get disgruntled and you don't want to invest. This work is not an overnight thing. It takes years to really embed culture in a positive way. And it takes multiple pillars to create this ecosystem. And that in itself is work.
So we know that part of an employee assistance program, even though there's not typically a large engagement with that in organizations, we know whether it's short-term counseling or digital solutions, there's still things that organizations want to offer to their people. What role do you see these tools playing in helping, being a resource for leaders to use for their folk, or to, make sure that they're really integrated in a nice way, that it doesn't feel contrived, doesn't overwhelm their team. It really makes a difference.
Yeah, it's a great question. Wellness apps in general cannot be successful as a standalone solution when it comes down to the well-being and mental health of employees. And that's where I'll start. It's not going to create sustainable work cultures. It's not going to change human behavior if you just present the app in finance. I introduced a mental health app and it was costly. It's a pretty penny. I implemented this program and let the culture simmer for a little bit. I wanted to make sure leaders started feeling a little bit more empowered to share their story, create new practices and norms within their teams. And there was a culture of openness and psychological safety. Then I added this app with the fundamental truth of that a lot of people will still not raise their hand and they'll still have internalized stigma when it comes to advocating for their own mental health needs. And that's fine. What I don't want leaders or organizations to do, and I'm seeing this more and more now, is that these mental health tech companies have introduced their product and they're flashy, and some of them even have AI now, and it's all virtual, all this fancy jazz. I like to, some of it is great, but it's not going to cure burnout or make people feel that they can actually show up at the workplace in a very authentic way. The problem is these standalone apps won't work, but they have benefits. I suggest organizations adopt these apps and follow up with human interaction. Mm-hmm. So if there are areas within the app that are specifically dedicated to the workforce, which a lot of these apps are now embedding, like manager training or leadership resources, have a facilitator use those resources and then embed that into practices. Like, how are we using these apps during high moments of stress? Yeah. It's like we're all on a Saturday and we're trying to learn about our mental health, but when we need to take care of it at the workplace, those pressure times, whether quarter ends, year ends, accountants always have those stressful times between October to April. How are they managing their mental health with deadlines and pressures from clients and internal targets to meet while having these technology apps? I would love to see the utilization rates for those companies who are burning out, because even though these wellness apps, I think the market now will be about $80 billion by 2030, 1 in 2 people are still burning out in the workforce. So the math is not actually calculating properly. Or as the younger kids say, the math is not mathing.
There's a lot of data that actually says the middle manager, the one that's managing team leaders who are managing individual contributors, that's the biggest opportunity in an organization, because that layer, impacts culture, sets the agenda for all of the folks who are actually doing a lot of the work. 100%. And to your point, they're having to deal and manage up with the most senior leaders of the organization. So I agree. The biggest opportunity is that slice. They're modeling the behavior. They're staying late hours or leaving early. They don't necessarily communicate as well. They probably are struggling with mental health, but not saying anything about it. So therefore, they set the agenda for everybody below them. We've hit some really good points. And I loved where we started, which is really about leaders looking at themselves, figuring out what they need, and then what they can notice about the people they work with closely. Resources they can take advantage of, digital resources. In your opinion, Bhavik and Dean, what haven't we talked about which would be really important to share?
Dean, I'll throw it to you first. I've been doing a lot of the talking.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I will answer that. I just want to say to Bhavik, our mission here is to speak to individual leaders. Much of what we've been talking about is what organizations can do. So how can an individual leader influence? And I hear you spoke very powerful about creating this critical mass amongst others, because I know their leaders listening care deeply for their people.
Yeah. You do have the power to make a difference, whether minor or holistic across an organization. I am in the firm belief that small changes do make a larger impact. It's just with consistency. If you're a leader, think about small actionable steps that you can take immediately and where you would like to go. You have the position to do. Think about all those people who are working with you and are people managers or new associates or interns. They're not going to have the same level of agency that you do.
That's right.
So rather than self-doubting or rather than thinking, I don't know where to start somewhere, because that's going to create a positive impact throughout the organization. You will advocate for others and they will see that and they will feel that. And that in itself is something that you can't capture in a data point.
I love being around people who get it, how leadership, well-being, and being yourself are important. What I love about this podcast and I love about this conversation, we're going to make it safe for leaders to be themselves. And I'd love to set some kind of aspiration for ourselves that if we're having this conversation a year from now, how do we want to know that or feel that we've had some impact on the space and the world, especially as it relates to leaders and well-being and mental health? We as leaders have to do better and take care of ourselves. Thank you so much for listening. Ask questions. Let us know if we need to connect you to Bhavik. Keep being amazing, bettering yourselves, and we'll see you on the next podcast.